October 2025, satellite imagery confirmed that Russia's military reserves had been drained to their lowest level since the first invasion wave of 2022. How did one of the world's largest armies reach such a breaking point? And why are millions of young Russians now refusing to fight? According to BBC and Reuters updates, Moscow's recruitment centers have quietly halted open calls and turned to private networks to locate soldiers, while intelligence from Kiev and Washington reports that Putin has secretly approved a shadow mobilization of 2 million reservists. The Kremlin once relied on patriotic rhetoric and financial incentives. Today, it relies on digital confinement. With the border closures announced in late September 2025, every man of military age is effectively trapped behind what Western observers now call a digital iron curtain. Sources from Al Jazeera and DW describe chaotic scenes at airports and train stations as border guards scanned QR codes linked to military records, automatically denying exit to anyone tagged as eligible for service. The move, designed to prevent another 2022-style exodus, instead ignited an invisible mutiny. Under the domino effect perspective, this single decree locking borders has triggered nationwide consequences. First, domino panic within Russia's youth. Second, mass disruption of industries as workers vanish from factories to hide. Third, growing resentment among soldiers' families, who fear losing sons to an endless front. A leaked Defense Ministry memo cited by The Guardian warns that morale has collapsed in 11 military districts, a sign that the chain reaction is spreading from the front to the home front. The once feared army is now fighting on two fronts: Ukraine outside and its own population within. Military analysts from Defense News note that after 3 years of attrition, Russian forces have lost over 1 million men killed or wounded. Replacing them would require an industrial and demographic miracle. Instead, Moscow has turned to mercenaries from Cuba, Nepal, and Syria, contracts confirmed by Reuters documents, and even offers fast-track citizenship to foreign fighters. This marks a historic shift from the patriotic army doctrine to a mercenary model born of desperation. Western defense officials see this as a clear strategic contrast. A regime that preaches national sacrifice now pays outsiders to fight its wars. From Washington, President Donald Trump's administration has publicly accused Moscow of enslaving its own youth, while NATO planners quietly debate how the collapse of Russia's recruitment pool might reshape the Eastern Front in 2026. Yet inside Russia, the greater fear is not foreign pressure, but domestic disobedience. A survey by the independent Levada Center in Moscow found that 58% of young men would rather serve prison time than the army. That figure alone terrifies the Kremlin more than any NATO brigade. Still, the machine moves forward. Draft notices are now sent via Gosuslugi, Russia's state portal, and automatically linked to bank accounts and border records. One missed notification can mean losing access to credit or travel rights. This technological mobilization has turned conscription into a form of digital surveillance unseen in modern Europe. As Defense Watch magazine remarks, the software is efficient, perhaps too efficient for a frightened society. The question now is not whether Russia can raise 2 million soldiers, but whether it can control 2 million refusals. Every new order feeds the fire of resistance. Meanwhile, the fear spreading through Russia's cities is about to meet its mirror image in the countryside, where resentment is quietly turning into open rebellion. By mid-October 2025, Russia's digital conscription system had reached full operation. Every male citizen between 18 and 35 was logged, cross-checked, and effectively sealed within the country's borders. Yet one question reverberated across social media and quiet kitchen tables: what happens when an entire generation simply refuses to go? Reports from Reuters, the BBC, and Al Jazeera all describe the same phenomenon: young Russians erasing their digital footprints. discarding SIM cards and vanishing into rural regions. The Kremlin's high-tech trap has produced an analog rebellion. In Moscow and St. Petersburg, IT workers and students are using VPNs and encrypted chat groups to share forged exemptions. In provincial towns from Tatarstan to Khabarovsk, families are hiding sons in attics and forest cabins. According to DW, the Ministry of Defense's electronic summons system has crashed twice in a single week due to deliberate data floods. The so-called Iron Curtain may control the borders, but it cannot contain mass defiance. From the domino effect perspective, each digital arrest triggers broader instability. The first domino fell in universities where attendance has dropped by 30% as male students disappear. The second domino hit transportation truck drivers are quitting to avoid checkpoints. The third struck morale inside the military itself. Deserters now outnumber new recruits in some brigades. Analysts from Defense News compare it to a controlled system losing power in every circuit at once. Western intelligence briefings shared with The Guardian reveal that Putin's secret mobilization order was meant to compensate for catastrophic losses at the Kharkiv and Donbas fronts. But the unintended consequence has been internal collapse. One Ukrainian official told NYT on October 20th that Russia's mobilization no longer expands the army. It implodes it. That implosion is visible in the economy too. Bank withdrawals surge as citizens fear frozen assets, and employers quietly terminate contracts of those marked as potential recruits. Here, the opportunity cost perspective exposes the deeper wound. Every engineer or doctor forced into hiding deprives the state of expertise needed for survival. The Kremlin is not only losing soldiers, it is sacrificing its own skilled base. While state TV celebrates volunteers, Defense News notes that aircraft maintenance teams at Voronezh and Kazan factories are operating at half-staff. Each absent worker delays missile and drone production by weeks, slowing the entire supply chain that sustains the front line. Meanwhile, the strategic contrast perspective reveals the ultimate paradox. A regime that claims to defend Russians from Western aggression is now treating its youth as hostages. As Al Jazeera's editorial put it, a government that locks its citizens in cannot call itself their protector. Even voices inside the Russian elite, including former central bank advisor Alexei Zubov, warn that internal coercion cannot replace loyalty. President Trump's White House has seized on these fractures, stating that a nation at war with its own people cannot sustain a war abroad. NATO's intelligence divisions are studying how this digital lockdown might weaken Russian logistics through labor shortages and declining morale. The broader question remains, how long can Moscow maintain total control before the system it built turns against itself? The rebellion that began in silence is spreading through data leaks, factory slowdowns, and whispered refusal. Yet beyond defiance lies a deeper break, the unraveling of a 20-year social contract that once held the Kremlin and its citizens together. What happens when that final bond snaps? In late October 2025, the tension finally reached the core of Moscow's identity, the collapse of the unwritten Putin contract. For 2 decades, that tacit deal had defined Russian stability. Citizens stayed out of politics, and in return, the Kremlin guaranteed order, steady pay, and protection from chaos. But when the digital draft summons began appearing on smartphones, that contract was shattered in an instant. How could the same state that promised safety now demand sacrifice? The strategic contrast perspective makes this contradiction painfully clear. Russia's leadership still speaks of defending the motherland from NATO encirclement, yet its policies now endanger the very citizens it claims to protect. DW's Moscow bureau reported that panic buying swept major cities after rumors of mass raids by recruitment officers. Banks limited withdrawals. Metro stations turned into checkpoints. The Kremlin's obsession with control has turned ordinary life into a battlefield of fear. Western intelligence officials told Reuters that this crackdown mirrors 2022's partial mobilization, but with one crucial difference: there is no exit. Then, 260,000 men fled abroad. Now millions are locked inside. The domino effect analysis shows the social chain reaction: university campuses, half-empty tech parks, deserted restaurants, and logistics firms paralyzed. Even the cultural sector has collapsed. Theaters suspend plays because half their male staff are hiding. Each small disruption pushes the economy and morale one step closer to implosion. Yet the Kremlin insists that the mobilization is manageable. An internal document leaked to The Guardian suggests that Russia's Ministry of Digital Development has deployed AI algorithms to identify disloyal clusters in urban areas by tracking inactive online accounts. What began as a military measure has evolved into an instrument of social control. The irony is brutal. The very technology that was meant to modernize the nation has become the engine of repression. Here, the opportunity cost perspective deepens the picture. Every resource spent on policing the population drains funds from the battlefield. Analysts at Defense News estimate that maintaining the new digital monitoring network costs the equivalent of $3 billion annually, money diverted from ammunition production and frontline logistics. The Kremlin, attempting to preserve authority, is effectively trading shells for surveillance. President Donald Trump's national security team has openly discussed these fractures. During a White House briefing on October 25th, Trump stated that Russia's internal fear is now its greatest weapon against itself. NATO's Strategic Command later noted that a state consumed by domestic control loses external initiative, signaling that the West now views Russia's repression as a self-inflicted strategic weakness. Meanwhile, inside Russia, quiet dissent grows. Religious leaders in Dagestan and Tatarstan urge non-cooperation. Mothers' groups across Siberia publish open letters demanding their sons' return. The Levada Center reports that trust in state media has fallen below 30%, the lowest since 1998. The once stable social hierarchy is unraveling. The Putin contract, built on prosperity and predictability, has been replaced by coercion and chaos. Yet, as in all collapsing systems, pressure breeds unexpected alliances. Civil servants leak documents, engineers sabotage data centers, and small networks of soldiers' families coordinate protests online. What began as fear is mutating into purpose. As Western observers warn, a frightened population hides, a betrayed one fights. And that transformation from silence to open defiance marks the Kremlin's greatest vulnerability yet. Meanwhile, the economic shock of these internal fractures is only beginning to unfold, revealing how political panic translates into a nationwide industrial and logistical breakdown. By early November 2025, Russia's economy had begun to mirror its collapsing front lines. The Financial Ministry's weekly report, briefly published, then deleted, revealed a 28% drop in industrial productivity and an alarming contraction in tax revenue. But behind these numbers lies a deeper truth. The Kremlin's war effort is now consuming the very system that sustains it. How does a nation fight a war when its workforce is vanishing into fear? From the domino effect perspective, every act of coercion has set off a new chain of collapse. First, the digital lockdown forced millions of skilled men underground. Second, their disappearance crippled manufacturing lines from Uralvagonzavod's tank plant to missile assembly halls in Kazan. Third, the absence of truck drivers, welders, and engineers froze the movement of goods and fuel, creating a paralysis that even government media can no longer hide. According to Reuters and Defense News, some ammunition convoys are now delayed by up to 10 days, simply because there are no certified drivers left to transport them. Economists from The Guardian call this phenomenon a brain lockdown, a reversal of the 2022 brain drain. Then talented Russians fled abroad. Now they are trapped jobless and afraid to appear in public databases. The opportunity cost perspective reveals the depth of this damage. Every doctor, programmer, or mechanic who hides from mobilization is one less citizen paying taxes or contributing to wartime production. DW's economic desk estimates that roughly 12% of Russia's active labor force has gone inactive since the border closures. This is not just lost productivity, it's the evaporation of state revenue that funds the military itself. Western analysts warn that the Kremlin's attempt to replenish the front with 2 million new troops will instead suffocate the economy that keeps those troops supplied. A NATO logistics report leaked to Al Jazeera in October observed that Russia's battlefield fatigue is now mirrored in its industrial arteries. Each day the mobilization continues, more supply chains break. In a chilling strategic contrast, Putin's regime proclaims self-reliance while importing critical components from China and North Korea to replace lost domestic capacity. Yet even these imports are delayed by sanction-busting routes through Central Asia. The Kremlin's rhetoric of fortress economy collides with its dependence on external lifelines. The very narrative of Russian resilience is unraveling under global scrutiny. President Donald Trump's administration has highlighted this contradiction, with senior Pentagon advisors noting that Moscow's economic mobilization is fighting its own logistics war. Meanwhile, European markets are bracing for secondary shocks. Gas supply instability, grain transit disruptions, and new waves of sanctions targeting Russian shipping insurance. NATO strategists see an unexpected advantage, a war that Russia can no longer afford to fight without bankrupting itself. Yet inside Russia, panic spreads differently. Small businesses in Yekaterinburg close early to avoid police raids. Hospitals ration medicine as doctors go missing. Energy technicians disappear from remote pipelines. Each vanishing worker is another domino falling, another artery of the war machine cut. This convergence of social rebellion and economic paralysis forms the perfect storm, an empire bleeding out from within. But as the financial collapse deepens, another force begins to emerge from the shadows, the silent fear that could soon ignite into open fury. By mid-November 2025, the quiet defiance inside Russia had begun to boil over. In cities from Kazan to Vladivostok, nighttime protests flickered like sparks on social media before being deleted by censors. Yet each deletion only amplified the anger. How long can a population endure being trapped in its own homeland? The first visible cracks appeared in Dagestan, where women again blocked roads, echoing the 2022 demonstrations that once shook the Kremlin. But this time, the movement spread faster. Independent outlet Meduza and Reuters confirmed that similar acts of resistance erupted in the Urals, where miners refused to report to local draft offices. By November 12th, Moscow's security services had detained more than 3,000 people for disrupting mobilization orders. Still, the numbers grew. From the domino effect perspective, every crackdown breeds a new circle of unrest. One mother's arrest sparks 10 more protests. One video of soldiers beaten by commanders spreads rage to another province. Analysts at DW describe it as a feedback loop of fear turning into fury. Local police, already overextended, now rely on Interior Ministry troops to contain riots. But those same troops, some recently pulled from the front, bring battlefield trauma home, fueling unpredictable violence. Meanwhile, Western intelligence tracks a subtler rebellion, the desertion epidemic. Defense News reports that over 25,000 soldiers have disappeared from the Western Military District alone since January 2025. OSINT data shared with Al Jazeera suggests that number could triple by year's end. Each deserter represents both a human and psychological loss, reinforcing the opportunity cost perspective. Every man fleeing the army must be replaced by another taken from civilian life, draining the economy further. Inside, the Kremlin panic seeps upward. A classified transcript leaked to The Guardian reveals ministers arguing over whether to impose martial law in major cities. "We can't fight Ukraine and our own people at the same time," one aide reportedly said. Yet according to the same leak, Putin dismissed compromise, declaring that discipline is survival. But to many Russians, that phrase sounds less like strength than desperation. The strategic contrast perspective exposes the irony: a government that once promised to protect the Russian world now points its weapons inward. Even state-aligned political analysts admit that the moral glue binding the regime has dissolved. When loyalty is enforced at gunpoint, unity becomes illusion. Abroad, President Donald Trump's National Security Council has characterized this as a controlled implosion. NATO briefings describe Russia's internal turmoil as a non-kinetic victory, one achieved through its own contradictions. European energy agencies, meanwhile, prepare for cascading disruptions as Russian transport bottlenecks deepen. Yet perhaps the most dangerous development isn't economic, it's psychological. Across social media, anonymous users circulate the phrase, "We won't die for him." It has become the underground anthem of a generation that sees no future under the Kremlin's command. Each repost, each whispered echo erodes the fear that once kept silence intact. And as that silence breaks, a far larger confrontation looms not just between soldiers and citizens, but between an entire society and the state that has turned against it. What happens when rebellion meets repression head-on, and the regime's last defense becomes the walls it built around itself? By late November 2025, the Kremlin's nightmare had become reality. The very system built to control the population was now feeding the uprising it was meant to suppress. The digital border, the crown jewel of Putin's internal security doctrine, has turned into the regime's own prison gate. Inside this vast enclosure, more than 2 million young men live in limbo, neither soldiers nor civilians, waiting for a knock that could seal their fate. How long can such a country sustain itself before its own citizens bring the walls crashing down? From Moscow to Murmansk, the mood has shifted from fear to fatalism. Reports from Reuters and BBC News describe empty factories guarded by conscripts, trains halted for lack of crew, and state TV showing footage of volunteers that viewers no longer believe. Independent analysts note that the information war has already been lost inside Russia, a statement that even Western intelligence agencies echo privately. The domino effect perspective is clearer than ever. Each tightening of control pushes another sector toward collapse, from logistics to healthcare to energy distribution. At the same time, the opportunity cost perspective reveals that Putin's survival strategy is consuming what remains of the Russian state. Resources once reserved for modernization, education, infrastructure research have been diverted into surveillance, censorship, and paramilitary policing. A recent Defense News assessment estimates that over $80 billion in civilian funds have been reclassified as security expenditures since March 2025, accelerating economic decay. What Russia gains in obedience, it loses in the ability to recover. Internationally, President Donald Trump's administration has framed the Kremlin's repression as a historic miscalculation. NATO's Joint Analysis Cell in Brussels projects that continued internal unrest could reduce Russia's effective combat readiness by 40% within 6 months. As Al Jazeera observed, Moscow has fortified itself so tightly that it has nowhere left to move. Inside Russia, however, the sense of betrayal runs deeper than any statistic. Soldiers returning from the front speak of chaos and starvation. Families mourn sons they never consented to send. Even loyal regional governors now complain privately of an economy in free fall. The social contract that once traded freedom for stability has been pulverized beyond repair. The strategic contrast perspective captures the final irony in trying to save his regime. Putin has destroyed the foundation that kept it standing. His patriotic narrative unity against the West has inverted into civil alienation. What began as the defense of a homeland has become a siege against its own people. Western experts predict that 2026 will test whether Russia implodes quietly or violently. The CIA's European division calls the current situation a pre-revolutionary freeze, while NATO economists warn of cascading defaults and regional fragmentation. Every sign points to a regime entering its self-made trap. And yet, in this tightening silence, a question lingers like smoke over Red Square. When the walls finally crack, will Russia's future emerge from the ruins or be buried